Now, I've told you several times that the Metropolitan Police's attempts to prosecute and fight the court's decisions over the Sarah Everard Vigil attendees was pure malice and was done simply to try and save face. And now we have proof, as the Metropolitan Police have had to stop their witch hunt after the CPS is said to have decided not to continue with the prosecutions because it was not in the public's interest. It was never in the public's interest. I mean, it's taken so long to come to this conclusion, and I just think it's rubbish. They knew this last year, but continued with the prosecution and appeals anyway. How could it have ever reached the threshold for in the public interest when the vigil was in remembrance of a woman who was kidnapped, raped and murdered at the hands of a serving Metropolitan Police constable? It really beggars belief. This change of stance is the first embarrassing blow for Mark Rowley since taking over as Commissioner for the Met, especially when the Met has been so keen on prosecuting 6 of the attendees to the vigil. Granted, it wasn't his decision to prosecute, but he could have said when he got in post that it was ridiculous and halted proceedings himself. But, as always, police will back police. Now that the Met have halted action, those who have been dragged through the courts are now able to take their own legal action against the Metropolitan Police for their arrests and for their treatment. One of those who was involved in the prosecutions was Dania Al-Obeid, who has now already informed the Metropolitan Police of pending legal action against them. She said, "This is a victory in its own right, but it doesn't hold the Met accountable for their actions at the vigil or their decisions to criminalise me and others for standing up and speaking out over a year later." Another of those targeted, Jenny Edmonds, said, "I'm glad the Met has been forced to drop this. That police used the same power abused to coerce Sarah Everard to her murder to arrest mourners at a vigil speaks volumes." She added, "I'm so exhausted from this going on for so long, but I am fortunate to be in a position where I am able to be defended. I know that where there is power granted, there is potential to abuse it." The 6 women who were being prosecuted were done so under the guise of breaking COVID rules for attending the vigil. But it's also important not to forget that Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, wasn't among those prosecuted, which is strange seeing as she also attended for a short while. Some of the 6 were previously convicted behind closed doors under the single justice procedure, as in just one magistrate, including Al-Obeid, who had been unaware she received a criminal record until she was contacted by press. After arguing that she had not been given a chance to plead not guilty, she, with others, was due to face trial later this year to try and overturn the convictions they received. An appeal the Met were fighting against to stop from happening. Now, more than a year after the vigil, the High Court ruled that Scotland Yard had misinterpreted COVID laws when it tried to block the vigil, and also failed to consider the human rights of freedom of speech and assembly. However, despite that judgment, the Metropolitan Police went ahead with convicting the 6 in Al-Obeid's case more than 15 months after the vigil. Following the Crown Prosecution Service's intervention, Al-Obeid announced that she would be launching legal action against the Met, and she would transfer the £6,000 that she had raised from covering the costs of standing trial to sue the police force over its policing of the vigil. Now, this will of course be an ever interesting turn of events, which I will keep an eye on and keep you updated on. But for the police to now turn around, well, the CPS to now turn around and say that it's not in the public's interest. Why is it not in the public's interest now, but it was in the public's interest before, is a question that I would certainly be asking. Bearing in mind, it's not just the Metropolitan Police that are to blame with these prosecutions, it is the CPS as well, as they made the charging decision.